webinar. Invitees, colleagues, students, research scholars, ladies and gentlemen. Let me, on behalf of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, welcome you to this special webinar on a very timely theme that we have chosen, that is current status of India-China relations. All of you are aware the type of challenges which is being posed by China to India across eastern Ladakh, especially Galwan Valley, and the way, in fact, India has been putting restraint, I think, is being seen as one of the important case study to understand that how is the situations can get back to normal. I think a lot of these things which are very, very pertinent in the current context, especially in the context of understanding India's options, what options India has, especially in terms of not only following the various restraint measures, but also see that how India could show its defense preparedness and also reach to a normalcy across the border. There are a lot of discussions happening, especially on the area of the existing confidence building measures, that how these confidence building measures really have been completely nullified by China. They have not been adhering to any of these stipulations made in any of these existing confidence building measures. There are talks on new confidence building measures. There are talks on how best India and China can strengthen that 5-point agreement, which was obviously discussed on 10th of last month in Moscow by both the foreign ministers of India and China. So I think the way the things are unfolding, it certainly is not very favorable to India, especially in the context of really prevailing upon China to get back to a status quo. So there are a lot of challenges, inherent challenges, which India has been confronting. There are, I think, only one mechanism which again can work, that is again through the dialogues, and whether these dialogues basically are going to be helping India again becomes a part of debate. Seventh round of dialogue has been scheduled on 12th of this month, where the corps commander will be meeting from both the countries, and they will again discuss about disengagement, de-escalation. But how far this would again be adhered by China again remains a question before many of us in terms of understanding the complexity of this crisis. And none of the science basically which has come up so far from China, which again is showing that obviously there is some sort of de-escalation happening or disengagement is underway. So to discuss all the challenges, especially what India shall be doing, what options India has, what are the challenges India obviously has been confronting, in what ways India can really be a very important, I don't know, how can India prevail upon China? All these really are going to be discussed in this today's webinar. And we can't think of a better panel than the existing one, which we have invited. And we have invited distinguished panelists like Sri Jayadeva Ranade, Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, Professor D Nalapat, and obviously Sri Seshadri Chari. Because all these four persons really have been following this debate, following this China for a number of years. I would like to speak few words about each one of them and maybe request them to make their initial comments. And then our plan is to make it more interactive session, because the audience is mostly the faculty and the students of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. And also we have a lot of students joining from Symbiosis Institute of International Studies. And we would like to learn from this panel about the various choices India has, in what ways those choices can help India in bringing normalcy in the region. We have the first speaker, Mr. Jayadeva Ranade, and I think he does not need any introduction, but because of a lot of our students have joined, I would like to say a few words about him. Mr. Jayadeva Ranade is currently the president of the Center for China Analysis and Strategy, and he has specialized for over 40 years in analyzing developments relating to China, Tibet, and East Asia. And his foreign assignments include Hong Kong, Beijing, and Washington, D.C. He basically has retired from the Cabinet Secretariat as Additional Secretary way back in the year 2008, and obviously has been following China regularly, and he is one of the famous sinologists in our country. The second panelist we have today, again, he does not need any introduction, Ambassador Gautam Bambawale. He really has been appearing quite often on television for giving his opinion on various issues which India-China standoff has been witnessing in the current context. He was a member of the Indian Foreign Service, And most of the part of his foreign service really was spent working on China, understanding China, and obviously he has a very deep insight on China's behavioral pattern, China's intentions, China fundamental goals, and he basically has been contributing significantly in understanding, in really providing his inputs to understand China in a better way. He worked in the Prime Minister's office during 2002-2004 at the Ministry of External Affairs. He was Joint Secretary of East Asia, which is a very important position during 2009-2014. And he also has dealt with China for 15 years, as I said, of his 34 years of diplomatic career. We have Professor D Nalapat in this panel. Again, he does not need any introduction. He is part of our Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. He is the honorary director. He also holds UNESCO Peace Chair at the department, and he obviously has been contributing and following China for a number of years. And his insights again are very useful for us to understand China better. We have Sri Seshadri Chari, and who again has been working on China especially for a number of years in his writings. He is a political commentator, he is a strategic analyst, and obviously has been contributing significantly in understanding China in a better way. So in fact, I will not spend much time on giving my remarks now. I would like to hear more from these very eminent panelists. We are fortunate to have them. We welcome them, and we would like to see that how best they can visit us after the situations become slightly better when the movement of mobility of people starts. I would like to really hold a conference on China. This is our 10th anniversary of our department, and we have decided that we will have a very huge conference on China after the situations become slightly better, because we have to build confidence among ourselves in terms of traveling to another place in this current situation of pandemic. So I would like to invite Mr. Jayadeva Ranade, and then obviously I will follow with other eminent distinguished panelists. So over to Mr. Jayadeva Ranade.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for the introduction and to this conference, take part in this conference. It's a privilege to be here and particularly talk on something so topical, something that is happening right now and which is going to, shall I say, shape India-China relations for quite some time to come. Before I start, can I ask you how much time I have? How many minutes do I have? Because I think, as you said, we should have a more interactive session, which I agree with.
But 8 to 10 minutes, sir. 8 to 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So let me start by describing the current situation as India being at a very crucial juncture in its relationship with China. The same goes for China too. I think the manner in which China has launched this particular military operation by passing its troops along the length of our LAC, initially for 1100 kilometers, later on across the entire LAC, is frankly speaking a blunder. If their idea was to maintain friendly ties with us and also enlarge their own ambitions or pursue their own ambitions, then this certainly is the wrong way of going about it. Having made those comments, let me just say that to me, what is happening comes as no surprise. When I began seeing the developments taking place, and I'll just recount them, it was clear that the Chinese are going to plan some kind of a military adventure. Naturally, the scale, etc., is something different. But if I can just pedal back a little bit, I would take 2016 as the year in which I first began noticing, and I think observers would have started noticing the warning signs that something is being planned. And there were 2-3 indicators of that. The first is in the Chinese military literature. One noticed an uptick in the military exercises being held by the PLA, that is the People's Liberation Army, on the Tibetan plateau. The second was the manner in which they were commenting on the arrival of certain aircraft on the Tibetan plateau, on the kind of exercises that were being done. And we were beginning to see increased references to India in this context. Short of saying that they're preparing for war against India, they were saying that we are preparing for a conflict on the Tibetan plateau. The meaning was very clear. Doklam happened. I think that was an interruption. It was not planned or an aberration, if I may say. But again, the vitriolic propaganda over the entire 73 days of the standoff at Doklam should have given a clear idea as to the extent of, shall I say, animus that the Chinese Communist Party had towards India. And since 2018, we began to see again a pronounced uptick in the training and in the kind of activities that were going on. I would mention here also that around this time, we also began seeing that the leaders, or shall I say the leadership, began focusing on so-called summit level meetings. This was actually being done, in my view, to maintain some kind of a strategic equilibrium while keeping us off balance tactically. I say that because the number of intrusions continued and there was a distinct change in the pattern of the intrusions, beginning with Xi Jinping's advent to power. That is since 2013. Xi Jinping, as you know, became President, General Secretary, and Chairman of the Military Commission in November 2012. And in 2013, we saw the first incursion, which was different in nature from those earlier. This was in April, just days before the arrival of Li Keqiang, the Premier of China, on his first visit to India as Chinese Premier. This incursion, the depth was greater, the duration was longer, and there was a certain degree of obduracy on the part of the Chinese troops who were there. It took a while for it to be resolved before Li Keqiang arrived here. It was just days before that. But within 10 or 15 days, there was a lengthy article which appeared in the Chungguo Qingnian Pao, which is the China Youth Daily. It's the highest circulation party paper in China. It's the official paper of the Communist Youth League. The circulation, in fact, exceeds that of the People's Daily. And this spelt out in great detail China's claim on Ladakh. Subsequently, when Xi Jinping came here, again on his first visit as President of China, there was an incursion at Chumar. The first was in Depsang Plains. This was in Chumar. This started before his arrival, continued through the duration of his stay, and then continued even for a while thereafter. The odd thing was that when one of our officers finally met, I would say, the Central Military Commission's representative in Beijing, the remark was a fairly gratuitous one. He said, you should have contacted us earlier and we would have resolved it. It's not that this intrusion was a secret. It was being reported by everyone, including their own apparatus. But this was the kind of comment that they made, a cavalier attitude towards the relationship with India. Subsequently, as I have mentioned to you about Doklam and the other events, there was an anger in the PLA that added on to all this after Doklam. The disengagement was not welcomed by the PLA. And in fact, Hu Shichen, the editor-in-chief of Global Times, actually put out a public tweet saying that the people of China are disappointed. There was a rumor that spread through China saying that Xi Jinping had to bribe India into agreeing to a disengagement by offering it $20 billion in loan. Anyway, that was dismissed. But the fact that the leadership took this rumor seriously is evidenced by the fact that the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the Chinese Ministry of National Defense, and the People's Daily, which is the official paper of the Chinese Communist Party, all three issued denials, formal denials of this rumor. So this was the situation. But if we go further back, the tensions had started building up in 2013 with the announcement of the Belt and Road Initiative and our opposition to it, and then Xi Jinping traveling to Islamabad and unveiling the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Since then, the Chinese have been repeating one mantra to every Indian visiting delegation or visitor, whether it was track 1, track 1.5, track 2, whether they were academics or think tank people. The mantra was very simple. They said, ease your tensions with Pakistan, resume talks with Pakistan, sort out the Kashmir issue, and then look to improve relations with China. So that was their messaging. Obviously, we followed our own track. Things began getting a bit more tense, particularly with our surgical strikes and the attack on Balakot. Subsequently, I won't go into the details, but we all know what happened on the Kashmir issue when we repealed 370. The Chinese took it up with the United Nations Security Council. Right now, what we are seeing is a face-off or a standoff between almost 45,000 troops on each side in the high altitude plateau area, mountain area of Ladakh and Tibet. That is where the troops are deployed. Every day, despite whatever you may read about dialogue or discussions at the diplomatic level or the military level, additional troops or equipment are being added. In fact, even yesterday, there were paradropping exercises and additional equipment were paradropped on the Chinese side. So this should be giving us a clear idea that the Chinese have no intention, firstly, of withdrawing to their positions pre-May, that means the April positions. Secondly, that they're probably, in my view, not giving due importance to this dialogue, but they're planning something else. My first impression when the Chinese came on 5th of May, when the news broke, was that they have come with a larger agenda. For those of you who read my articles, you will find that I have been mentioning that. I still feel that the movement of so many troops along the entire length of the border is not for just gaining a few kilometers of ground here or there. There is a larger objective. The second point I would like to make is that what we are up against in that context, that this entire military movement needed to have been planned over time. And my assessment is that the planning started in 2018 at the least. It had to be planned. Someone had to authorize the massing of forces and equipment from different theater commands to this sector, and that could only be done by Xi Jinping. So in other words, the person we are talking to is the person who has engineered the entire situation, and that is Xi Jinping. I think that needs to be kept in mind, and that is why I started off by saying that we are at a crucial juncture. In my opinion, the entire nature of India's relations will change. It has to change. And I think we need to sit back also and look as to the policies that we have been following till now, where the flaws were, and there were many, where the flaws were, and how we should move ahead. I'm not suggesting that we go to war, but I am saying that if it comes to that, we have to be prepared. And there's certainly no question of giving an inch of ground, but forget territory. This needs to be factored in even in our other discussions with the Chinese at international fora included. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for a very candid assessment on the recent standoff between India and China. I think the similar view was echoed by the Chief of the Army Staff yesterday. In his annual press conference, he made a very important statement that we are ready and very well positioned to take on China, and there is no scenario where they can get the better of us. So that reflects India's defense preparedness in the current context. Obviously, that is an option, but obviously that option is not going to be considered anytime in near future. So thank you very much for your candid assessment. Now let me invite Ambassador Gautam Bambawale for making his remarks. Over to Ambassador Gautam Bambawale.
Thank you very much, Professor Arvind Kumar, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. Let me get straight to the heart of the matter. Let us try to understand what is it that the Chinese are trying to tell us, what they're trying to message to us by undertaking this military operations that they have done in eastern Ladakh, and try to understand how they think about it. So basically, I'm of the opinion that there are two implications. One is a tactical implication, and the other is a strategic implication. The tactical implication is that on the ground, Chinese troops are trying to move their actual ground positions right up till the line which in their mind is the LAC, or the line of actual control between China and India. So this is what they're trying to do on the ground. This is what their tactical moves are. Now you must remember that even an LAC, which may not be a boundary, has to be decided between two sovereign nations through bilateral talks, through bilateral consultations, and through bilateral discussions. What the Chinese are trying to do, in effect, is they're trying to determine and define the LAC unilaterally by themselves. And this is something that no self-respecting nation, and definitely not a country like India, will take lying down or will accept on face value. So this is what is the tactical implication of the Chinese military action, attempted Chinese military coercion. At the strategic level, what the Chinese are trying to signal, and this they're trying to signal not just to India, but they're trying to signal to the rest of Asia and to the rest of the world, is that China is the preeminent power in Asia. China is the hegemon in Asia. There is a huge asymmetry in economic, military, and comprehensive national power between China and India, and that India must understand its place in this Asian hierarchy. So China is the numero uno, China is the number one power in Asia, India is somewhere way down, and all other Asian countries, of course, are also way down. So this is something that the Chinese are trying to indicate, not just to India, but to Asia as a whole and the world at large. Now, what it implies is that many people think that the 21st century is the Asian century. The Chinese are trying to say, look, the 21st century is not an Asian century. It is solely a Chinese century. And this again are certain propositions which very few self-respecting nations in the world can accept. Now, what has India done in reaction to the Chinese military moves? One, of course, is, as all of you know, that we have built up our military strength on the LAC between India and China, particularly in eastern Ladakh, in other parts of the LAC too. But in eastern Ladakh, we have built up our military. And in fact, we have to a certain extent blocked the Chinese from meeting all their objectives. And remember, as I had said earlier, their on the ground objective was to move their actual ground position right up till the points which they think in their mind is the LAC between India and China. So we have blocked them militarily. Now, just taking military action is not sufficient. We as a country, as a nation, to indicate our disappointment with China, to indicate our displeasure with China, also need to back it up with other policy measures in the economic sphere, in the economic field, and in the political field. In the political field, what we need to do and what we are doing, as all of you can see, is that we are strengthening our relations with countries such as the United States, such as Japan, such as Australia. We've just had the Quad meeting in Tokyo today, with other countries also like France. And the fact that France has been able to deliver the first of the Rafale jets, even while these tensions with China are continuing, is a very important signal of support from France, with countries like Germany, as well as the United Kingdom and many other democracies. So on the political side, that is one of the steps we can take and which we have taken and which we are taking. On the economic side, we need to show the Chinese that if there is no peace on our borders, it cannot be business as usual. And in fact, as all of you know, that right up till 2018, perhaps even 2019, each year the Chinese used to run a trade surplus of 50 to $55 billion with India. Now, this cannot continue under the current circumstances, and therefore the government of India, rightly in my opinion, has not only banned 100 odd Chinese apps, particularly TikTok, and I think the importance of banning TikTok is that it has had a snowballing impact, a snowballing effect in other parts of the world. The US is considering banning TikTok also. Japan and South Korea are also very actively considering banning TikTok. We have, of course, tightened our FDI procedures so that there is added stringency in these procedures, and we have ensured that public procurement has been streamlined in such a way that Chinese firms will not win contracts and bids even if they are L1. Now, another very important measure which I had been pressing for and which the government has indeed taken is in the whole area of 5G. Now, it is not that the government of India has banned Chinese firms from participating in India's 5G trials and rollout, but it is very, very clear to people like us that the government of India has advised our telecom operators that it would be in their own interests not to work with Chinese companies where 5G trials and rollout are concerned. And some of this you have been seeing in recent moves that our telecom operators have made. So to the question that Professor Arvind Kumar had posed right at the start, that what can India do in reaction to China's military moves in Eastern Ladakh? We have to take measures which are in all three areas, which are in the military field, in the economic field, as well as in the political sphere. And apart from that, India has to be determined, which it is. India has to be resolute, which it is. And we must continue to keep ensuring and keep demanding that the status quo ante should be restored by the Chinese PLA, by the Chinese army. Let me also say a quick word, Professor Arvind Kumar, and I'll stop after that, and talk a little bit about Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think, in my opinion, Atmanirbhar Bharat does not mean going back or going to a state of autarky where we do not trade with other countries in the world. I believe that Atmanirbhar Bharat is a proposition which must be seen in the China context, where we are dependent on China in certain sectors, in certain segments, in certain industries to a very large extent. And one example is that of active pharmaceutical ingredients, where we import almost 70% of our requirements from China. So I believe that Atmanirbhar Bharat will ensure that we in India will continue to manufacture and produce many of these kinds of goods, where India has a competitive advantage, but which we had stopped manufacturing because the playing field was not a level playing field. And let me end, of course, by just saying that given the fact that the Chinese have indicated the kind of relationship they want with India, they have indicated through their military moves in Eastern Ladakh, on the borders of India and China, on the LAC between India and China, that they do not want a progressive, forward-looking, forward-leaning relationship. They want a tense, they want an unbalanced relationship. And I'm afraid that that is exactly what is going to unfold and happen in the coming weeks, in the coming years, and in the coming months. The relationship is going to deteriorate and is going to deteriorate fast. And the longer the standoff continues, the greater will be degree of deterioration in bilateral relations. And I will stop here, Professor Arvind Kumar. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir, for making a comprehensive assessment. Almost every which China has been posing to India. And obviously, you have rightly pointed out that the presence of a large concentration of troops, this has defied the existing confidence building measure, and that obviously has reflected their preeminent behavioral pattern. I think that is very well reflected in their approach. And the narrative which they have been planning to set about the Chinese century, I think is very well taken. Thank you very much, sir. Now I invite Professor D Nalapat, and would like to request him to speak on his impressions on this current standoff. Over to Professor Nalapat.
Yeah, thank you, Arvind, very much. And I was very happy to see the two earlier presentations. And may I say that I agree completely with both the presentations. I'd only like to say that, some of us wake up late, some of us wake up early. And in my own case, I think it was the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, that was, in a sense, the first signal that those who believed that there could be an equal or equitable relationship with China were possibly not being realistic. From that time onwards, it was clear that so far as China was concerned, Kashmir was exactly the way Pakistan wanted it to be, which is as a province of Pakistan. The very name China-Pakistan Economic Corridor passing through Pakistan-occupied Kashmir indicated that to the Chinese, it was Pakistan that was the lawful owner of Kashmir. You cannot divide Kashmir into POK or other parts, etc. If you look at a unified Kashmir state, and if you call one part of it the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, what it implies is that the other parts also belong to Pakistan as well. I think that is an early warning sign which possibly should have been heeded a little better by some of us. Of course, so far as Xi Jinping I think Xi Jinping is very, very clear that he is actually looking at nothing less than establishing Chinese primacy over the globe. And I think it's important for him to do so, for the simple reason that the Chinese Communist Party is essentially regarded as a vehicle for Han primacy and Han dominance. This is the one motivation, this is the one justification for the rule of the party. And if I may say so, the absolute control that the party has on the lives of the Chinese citizens. The point made to them is, you are Han, most of you are Han, and those of you who are not Han will, over the next few years, become as close to Han as possible, as makes no difference. But that this party is going to be the vehicle in which you're going to go back to that mythical period when China was the Middle Kingdom and the center of the world. We all know, for example, Chinese history. 3,000 years it was, then 5,000 years, now possibly 7,000 years. So Xi Jinping is in the process now of actually going ahead with the process which I think was begun in a very gentle way by Hu Jintao. And that process was essentially to create a narrative of the great and glorious China that has been there from eternity and which for a few hundred years has been deprived of its rightful position at the head of the totem pole and now is reclaiming it. And to reclaim it, you need the Communist Party. And now you need the Communist Party with Xi Jinping at the core of the Communist Party. So this is the ideology of the party, stripped of everything else, is essentially this, that look, we are going to dominate the world. And the only way you as a people are going to dominate the world is that if we lead you, and especially if this person leads you. So what has been described by the previous two speakers, I think, fits essentially into that particular construct. And I think it's important for policymakers to understand the limits of any kind of belief that the Chinese are going to have a different attitude, because if you have a different attitude, it essentially means that the attitude that they have as a party is not correct. And if that happens, it will have the Gorbachev-like effect on China. Now, everybody in China has studied the history of Mikhail Gorbachev, and nobody wants to be the Chinese Gorbachev. So this is the situation that is there. So far as India is concerned, and so far as what is happening to India is concerned, I mean, it's very difficult to add to the excellent points made by the two previous speakers. And I'd only like to say that I think one of the problems that the Chinese are facing is the fear that there will be an alliance system in which the US plays an important role, and India plays an important role, Japan plays an important role within the Indo-Pacific. The Chinese are very clear that the Indo-Pacific is an important construct, but the only difference is that they would like to be the dominant power in the Indo-Pacific, not some quote-unquote faraway power. And that faraway power is the United States. And certainly not that faraway power in alliance with India and two countries that the Chinese publicly and privately are known not to particularly like. So essentially, I think the idea from my point of view, and I may be wrong, my hypothesis is they are looking at trying to humiliate India in some manner. Militarily, if necessary, diplomatically, if possible, but certainly humiliate India and show up India as less than a good ally of any country. If you show up a country as being weak, as being hesitant, or being confused, well, then you're essentially advertising to other countries that there's no point having an alliance with this particular country because that ally is going to be of no use to you. So I think the first point is to, in a sense, inflict a humiliation on India. And increasingly, I think my viewpoint is that humiliation, the way they're designing that humiliation is that they're looking at a military kind of situation across the Himalayas. It may not be, in their mind, a broad-based assault across the entire frontier. It may not be a 1962. In their thinking and their planning, it may be some limited thrusts. For example, the Chumbi Valley. For example, Arunachal Pradesh. For example, near the Daulat Beg Oldie Airport, Ladakh, near Aksai Chin. It could be 2 or 3 of some piercing strikes during that, in these particular regions. But certainly they're looking at inflicting what they hope will be a quick humiliation of India over 2 to 3 weeks maximum, during which time, of course, other countries cannot really intervene. And frankly, I don't think India or any other country has made any formal or legal arrangements for intervention. We're talking about Donald Trump as a person who is talking about China. Well, Donald Trump made it very clear in his visits to East Asia that, look, if you don't have a formal treaty, why should I help you if you're in trouble? So I don't believe that we have a formal treaty. I don't know if we are getting into a formal treaty. I don't see much signs of that. But I think the Chinese are basically looking at that. And that they would like to advertise, one, to the United States, that you're relying on India. Well, you're relying on the wrong power. This is a very weak and confused country, and it's not going to work. It's not going to help you at all. Two, they're looking at India and saying, don't try and be in any sense, any impression that you can be standing equally with us. And more importantly, that you can prevail over countries that have, quote unquote, long been very close to us, such as Pakistan. It's very clear that as far as Xi Jinping is concerned, he is firmly on the Pakistan side so far as Kashmir is concerned and so far as other matters are concerned. Apart from Kashmir, you've got matters relating to the UNSC, certain terrorists who have been there, and wherever you name it, the Chinese have, except where there's temporary advantage. As for example, if they want to be, let's say, vice chairman of the FATF, or some kind of a temporary advantage, and they say, okay, we'll make a temporary concession to get a permanent advantage from India. And India is a very generous power. India is a very forgiving power. So generally they get their own way and they become, core in the FATF. They become core in the WTO. They become core in international organizations. Whereas in the international organization that they have got an important role in, certainly it is very unlikely any of the countries or members of that, including the Russia, is ever going to take a stand which is hostile to China. Russia in particular cannot, because Russia is completely dependent on China in its economy and various other ways for whatever reason. But so again, I would like to say that it's very, the past is the past, the present is the present, the future is the future. It's very important not to allow the past to intrude into the future as the future or the present. It's very important for you, and I know we've got our young students here. It's very important for you in your analysis to separate the past from the present and the future. These could be, in a sense, meshed to some extent with each other, but only to some extent. And please don't believe that the meshing is any more than what it actually is. Because the problem in India has been that for us, the past, the present, and the future is what we Malayalis call an aviyal. It's all mixed up together. So we really don't distinguish between the past. We really don't distinguish between the present and the future. For us, so far as the making of policy is concerned, in the policy kitchen, all three are in a sense a mixture. Well, I'm afraid that is unlikely to be the case. Now, all I can say is that yes, we are headed for interesting times. Two, the reality is Xi Jinping, and I would like to give credit to Xi Jinping, frankly, has very definitely and definitively tried to separate China from the United States in terms of finance, in terms of logistics, and in terms of services, in terms of Eurasian power, in terms of maritime power. In the financial thing, I've tracked this for quite some time about his introduction of blockchain, the digital currencies, about the effective way in which he has been trying to cast doubt on the dollar, that there's going to be a dollar reset, how we have been getting rid of his dollars by essentially delineating Belt and Road initiative projects in dollars, creating huge debts, and then exchanging those dollars, which he really doesn't want anyway, for assets which are very useful to China and which he believes China's military and geopolitical heft will enable him to hold on to, even if you have a government there that comes to power. Of course, the Chinese are very capable, and they know they're capable of handling almost any government that comes to power, and that is one of the problems that are being faced. Another thing is basically ASEAN. The Chinese, for them, ASEAN is in a sense the soft underbelly. If you look at the 1930s and 1940s, the soft underbelly was in a sense the countries to the south, the Mediterranean countries. And it was that, in fact, in which the tactics were used of going through the soft underbelly, going through the Mediterranean countries, going into Italy from the south, and attacking Germany in that way. Well, the soft underbelly is ASEAN. Although you have large Chinese-speaking communities in these places, the difficulty that these communities are facing is under the Chinese Communist Party, headed by Xi Jinping, if you are ethnic Chinese, you belong to the Chinese Communist Party and its leadership. You need to work for the greater glory of China and for the greater glory of China as defined by the Chinese Communist Party and its leadership. So across ASEAN today, those who are ethnic Chinese are basically getting a choice between working for the interests of China and working for the interests of the countries in which they are citizens. And some of them are finding the choice easy. Some of them are finding it difficult. But I think that is increasingly going to create a problem, especially because Taiwan today, which the Chinese have long said is a part of China. Well, it's the reality is Taiwan is today a Chinese Sinic entity that is democratic. And Taiwan today is an alternative to China. So it is showing the Chinese diaspora across the world an alternative. And 4 years ago, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen understood this point very well and systematically started working to develop an alliance with the United States. Right from the first weeks of her coming to power, she started working on an alliance with the United States. That is very strong today. A second term in office, that alliance is likely to be even stronger. And in my personal view, the Chinese, they're looking at a humiliation, a military humiliation. They're unlikely to get it across the Taiwan Straits, contrary to a lot of commentary that I've been reading, for the simple reason that the alliance with the United States is today, I mean, a lot of it is subterranean, but it is very, very strong. And therefore, it is going to be very difficult for the Chinese PLA to prevail over Taiwan without significant and almost terminal damage to its own future. The South China Sea, well, it's been slowly choking the South China Sea with structures, and it hopes to keep on doing so. It hopes to multiply these structures, but there, again, it's becoming filled with naval vessels and naval flotilla led by the United States. Of course, the big hope in China is that Joe Biden is going to come as president. I'm not sure that that hope is going to be realized, in the sense, even if you have a Biden presidency, and if I may say so, as some kind of an outlier, I mean, if Trump gets through this COVID thing over the next 4 or 5 days, if the virus doesn't inflict too much damage on him, in my view, this entire episode, contrary to what we are seeing in MSNBC and CNN and across much of the media, actually it could be of enormous help to him, because Americans like a leader who's basically this kind of a person who's willing to take risks, a person who's willing to stand and fight, as he's now fighting the virus. So this could be something that could turn the election around for Trump if in the next 3 or 4 days he recovers from COVID sufficiently to canvass. But having said that, I'd like to say, even if Biden comes, I'm reasonably certain that a team Biden is not going to let go on China to any considerable extent, because Xi Jinping is very clear that this is a world, as has correctly been said by the previous two speakers, in which there is only room for one tiger on the mountain. Please, I think some of us in India believe that we are that tiger. I don't think too many people in China have ever considered India to be in that position. It's the United States that's the tiger, and the Chinese tiger is displacing the United States very visibly. I don't see any US president committing the harakiri of that situation. Having said that, I want to end with this by saying, I believe very clearly that it's important to have an Asia Pacific, to look into the Indo-Pacific, and like you had an Atlantic Charter, have an Indo-Pacific Charter. The Atlantic Charter was meant to protect the countries on both sides of the Atlantic against the menace of a superpower that was predatory. The Indo-Pacific Charter will have to have the same purpose, and we need that Indo-Pacific Charter. Secondly, we're talking about the Quad Alliance. I mean, from the limited things that I was able to get from television about Ambassador Jaishankar's remarks and Mike Pompeo's remarks, I didn't get very much. I'm reasonably certain that the internal discussions are a little more spirited and a little more valuable. I certainly hope so, because unless we can enter into a de facto alliance, it needn't be a formal alliance, but it has to be a de facto alliance in which it is very clear, if one country is attacked, every other country comes into action. And the same thing has to be the case with the Indo-Pacific Alliance, which has got to secure democracies across the world. Even countries in ASEAN, etc., who may publicly poo-poo it, will privately welcome it and privately sign on. So we're not interested in people wearing their affiliation to the Quad on their sleeves, provided they wear their affiliation in practice. And I'd like to see a clear military and security alliance with other countries that are facing this China challenge in practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. as always, very, very comprehensive and very candid assessment on various facets of China's behavioral patterns and how this is impacting India. I think we really learned from the presentation as previous two presentations. Now we have the last panelist in the panel, Sri Seshadri Chari, and we would like to hear from him, as Professor Nalapat said, that obviously there will not be any repeat of 1952, but whether India is moving towards an armed conflict with China, Chinese aggression is becoming very, very blatant.
It is not working. I'll see if I
Seventh
can.
Core Commander level talks, which has been scheduled on 12th, how that is going to be of great value, especially in the context of this overall disengagement process, that has to be understood. And more importantly, if there's a talk on disengagement, why China has not been including Depsang? I think that is what is very important from India's point of view. So how these are going to be addressed, how these are going to be understood by India, let us hear from Sri Seshadri Chari and try to learn from him. Over to Sri Seshadri Chari.
Thank you, Professor Arvind Kumar. I hope, am I audible now?
Yes, sir. You are very much audible.
Okay. There is an internet problem, so you will have to. My camera is not working. So anyway, my face is not something that can launch 1,000 ships. All the earlier speakers are very cogently and in a very great detail. They have put out all the details that were needed for this. When we are talking about resetting India-China relations and then going through the process of the present status of India-China relations, we have to keep in mind certain things that as far as Chinese strategy is concerned, they are not, the Chinese strategy is not something that they started working yesterday. In fact, the Chinese strategy has been on from 1935 to 1940 onwards, right from the time Mao Zedong started his long march, and then he stormed into power in Beijing in 1948. And then from there, the old idea of Chinese supremacy and treating all other civilizations, all other countries around as uncivilized people, and China being the only civilized country to rule the world. That kind of a situation has emerged again from 1948. So, in fact, while launching the BRA in 2013, Xi Jinping very categorically said that together we can build a broad community of shared interest. So what he is saying is, it is the BRA which is going to be the next trade architecture of the world, and China will be the leader of that architecture of the world, and together we can build a broad community, which means it will be a Chinese society, Chinese world, China-dominated world, China-led world, and a world where a new system will be developed, a new trade architecture, a true new military balance, and everything will be developed by China, and China will be the rule maker, not the rule follower. So that is the kind of agenda that Xi Jinping gave in front of him. In fact, long before Xi Jinping, in fact, if you see Mao's strategy also, one thing we should all remember, that as far as strategy is concerned, China does not believe in preparing a strategy that works for 1 year or 2 years. China's first strategy was worked out sometime in 1948, when they started getting connected to the whole world. The first connection that they established was sometime around 1940. They built what they call the Xinjiang province was taken over, and a new frontier. I mean, Xinjiang itself means a frontier. So they annexed the frontier into the mainland. They made it a free country in 1940 and 49. 1st October 1955. By 1st October 1955, it was all completely under the control of China. So by taking over Xinjiang, what China got was a direct border connectivity with Central Asia, with Kazakhstan, and with Kyrgyzstan. Next, they took over Tibet. By taking over Tibet, they got Nepal, they got Bhutan, and they got border with India. And not only that, by taking over Tibet, they got border. They could get hold of Aksai Chin area, Tibet, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and they had border with Tajikistan, they have border with Kyrgyzstan, they have border with Russia, they have border with Mongolia, and they have border with Kazakhstan. So basically, the regional issues, the regional strategy was planned out sometime in 1948. And 1948 to 1960, this was the regional plan. The only problem with the regional plan was India, which they tried to sort out in 1962 and created a situation whereby India would probably be shown its place. That is the kind of a situation that they developed as far as the border with India was concerned. Now, when it comes to the question of the rise of China, the growth of China, the continued growth of China's overall national power, including its economic and military capabilities, and the manner in which strong and resurgent China is employing its power, it has already resulted in having very far-reaching consequences, not only for Asia, but for the entire world in general. And as far as India is concerned, India and its neighborhood in particular. The Chinese leadership's commitment is actually to build a comprehensive national strength and leveraging its strategic configuration of power so that it can achieve the strategic interest, and it will always remain a major factor impacting the future stability and security of Asia, and through Asia, the world. What we talk about Asian century, even if it is an Asian century, it will be a China-dominated Asian century, and if it is China-dominated Asian century, it is China which will be a major factor impacting the global architecture. So China, it will consolidate its power, and it has already consolidated, and in future it will continue to consolidate its power, and it will have a multi-dimensional impact on regional states and also all the strategic periphery, particularly in Southeast Asia. Now, most of these countries which are affected were actually looking up to the US as the sole dominant power post the end of the Cold War. But now what is happening is, in between, during the Obama regime, the US outlook towards China was a little different. And we will not go into the details why it was different, but China was pitched as the pivot. But this, I think, was China's own strategy in getting over US on its side. But now there is China is turning out to be a very potential threat to the US, and also the Pentagon's strategic guidance document of 2011 very clearly mentions the American strategic outlook and their engagement in the Middle East, their engagement elsewhere, and how these engagements have actually given them some sort of a setback as far as global power structure and power positioning is concerned. Now, from the Chinese perspective, the future strategy will be probably dictated by the manner in which these instrumentalities of its national powers they are able to exploit, and the existing prospective strategic configuration of power both globally and Asia, how they will be able to manage it. Of course, this is going to be highly dependent on how China shapes its future, especially after the present pandemic. Don't forget the fact that the pandemic, although the final word as far as the pandemic is concerned, whether it is a China-initiated pandemic, whether they did it purposely or whether it was an accident and all, is a subject for a different seminar. But the present pandemic has come as a serious intrusion, not only into China's plans, but also the plans of the other countries. So whether China will emerge much stronger than what it is now, most economically vibrant, politically very stable, and militarily very strong. Whether this will happen or will it become unstable? we should not forget the fact, as earlier speakers have also pointed out, especially I think Mr. Jayadeva Ranade pointed out about the PLA versus the political establishment in China. So if there is political instability, if there is a decline in economic capability, and if there is a social unrest, all this could directly affect the comprehensive national power strategy of China. So we have to wait and watch as far as these situations are concerned. But one thing is very clear, we cannot eternally wait and watch for China to change or devise their strategy so that we become what we call a reactive country. We react to what China does. Instead of reacting to China, I think we will have to set our own priorities and positioning properly. We have what we call a diplomatic area where we can work on certain positions. We can take certain positions as far as diplomacy is concerned. The Indo-Pacific region, there is a good directional movement as far as Indo-Pacific region is concerned, and we should increase our diplomatic outreach as far as Indo-Pacific region and all the countries in the region is concerned. There are other areas of diplomatic and strategic de-encirclement of South Asia we can do. As far as India is concerned, we have already moved into Afghanistan. We are now talking to Myanmar. The foreign secretary had visited Bangladesh. He has foreign secretary visited Myanmar also. And we have already given $400 million facility to Reserve Bank facility to Sri Lanka. And we are also, of course, Nepal is one country where we have certain problems, but we will sort out the Nepalese problem also, in fact. So all this will be, this will leave out Pakistan, which is in the immediate periphery. So we will have to deal with Pakistan, and we will have to probably the dealing with Pakistan will require some sort of an out-of-box thinking, probably. And then we will have to also plan some sort of a strategic and long-term strategic and economic relationship with Taiwan, with South Korea, with Japan, with Thailand, with Singapore, with Vietnam, and with Australia. We will have to improve our outreach as far as Quad is concerned. And very recently, the foreign minister and defense minister both visited Russia, and they had a very interesting talks with the Russian counterparts. I think we will have to play our Russia card much better, because we should not forget the fact that when we are working out a strategy, Russia also could be developing some sort of insecurities as far as the rising Chinese power positioning is concerned. And I will not go into the details of our military strategy, but as far as economic strategy is concerned, we will have to work out certain economic strategic dimension also. So I think the present situation is a challenge as far as an opportunity for us. Ambassador Bambawale mentioned about the Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think we have to work more diligently as far as the Atmanirbhar Bharat concept is concerned. We will have to reduce our dependence as far as China is concerned. Even otherwise, it is not much of a dependence as far as China is concerned. Out of some 3,500 products, we are dependent on China only for 350 products. This is the report that was published by RIS some 2-3 months back. So we are in a strong position, but there is a downturn as far as economy is concerned. We will have to develop that. We will have to strengthen our military strategy and also our diplomatic strategy. And this opportunity will have to be used. I think I'll stop here, and then we can probably do more as far as question and answer session is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for making a very comprehensive presentation, and obviously a lot of points you have brought out. Now I will open this whole session for discussion. The questions can be asked, but I would like to raise a couple of issues before I open it for discussion. See, now, as I said, the 7th Corps Commander level talks are going to begin on Monday, coming Monday, that is 12th. And the way, so far, the way India-China talks have happened, especially on disengagement, are on Chinese terms. India's terms, especially in terms of negotiating for a position of strength, that is not being witnessed. Because only one thing I would like to highlight, because Depsang is not included as a part of disengagement process. Those parts of Eastern Ladakh which are under the ambit of Chinese influence right now, those parts China does not want to be discussing during this core commander level talks. So how best China can get back to a status quo? That remains a very pertinent question for this panel to discuss. The second thing, I think it was pointed out that how best India can obviously make China less important on economic side, because as you know that economic engagement with China that has really been phenomenal all these years, and obviously that will have a lose-lose situation for both India and China. Right now, as you know, that China remains our largest trading partner, and that obviously would divert the overall challenge for India in emphasizing on its Atmanirbhar Bharat, and that point again was discussed. But how that is possible in the current context? The third thing, which is very important, that is again that how long this standoff will keep continuing, in the sense that the standoff was reported during the first week of May, as pointed out by Mr. Jayadeva Ranade, and how long this standoff will keep continuing like this, because there have been a very huge concentration of troops from both sides right now, and that has obviously defied the existing 1993 and 1996 agreement. And these two basically were very important agreements in the context of India-China confidence building measures. So how long this, how we can envisage that, okay, this can really be taking a different shape. Thing, and the last thing which I want to really panel to consider, that if India is not heading towards an armed conflict with China, what would be the best possible way? Everyone is talking about resuming peace by having talks, peace dialogues. But is that time not come so far where India has to call China's bluff? And if India is really prepared, especially in the context of reflecting its defense preparedness, then what steps India can really show? And going back by the statement which the Chief of the Army, Chief of the Air Staff made yesterday in that annual media conference, and he said very clearly that we are ready and very well positioned to take on China, and there is no scenario where they can get the better of us. In the context of this statement, what action India shall be taking? India has to take action on the basis of the existing ground realities. So I would like the panel to consider this many, and obviously we'll have Q&A depending upon the time, available time with us. There is some challenge from our side, especially on the technical issue. We are trying to handle that. But obviously, we are using our now mobile phones and all we are doing, and we are trying to really put this across. Those of them who have questions, they can raise their hands and ask questions. And the questions can be pointed to any one of the panel or common. Like, I would also like you to introduce yourselves. Yes, Rahul, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be a part of this presentation. I'm Rahul Mehta, and I'm a second-year student at the department. My question is for Professor Nalapat. If I would like him to give me some clarity on a part that he spoke about. So, sir, when you spoke about the part of de facto alliance or entering into even a formal alliance with United States or other partners of choice to address this conflict of India and China. My question was that even in an earlier webinar, Mr. Shakti Sinha said that India's choice to not put all of its eggs into one basket is not something to be seen as a weak point, but it is something that India does to maintain its strategic autonomy. So my question is that if we are trying to enter into an informal alliance with any of these partners of choice, such as US, Japan, or Australia, how much would they be willing to see India as a reliable alliance who would stand by them even in face of another common adversary apart from China? So do these points also come into consideration to choosing of what cost India is ready to pay when it enters into even an informal alliance? And is a formal alliance a better choice in order to make things clear as to whom we are allying against or what we are ready to do in a relationship from the beginning, so that we don't have to pay other costs of partnerships when when the adversary changes from China to someone else maybe in the future. So if you could give me a little clarity on this.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Rahul,
Prof, more questions.
I simply want to say that, of course, in an ideal world, we'll get all that we want and we will not need to make any contribution to what others want. It's not an ideal world. So far as the question of baskets are concerned, I mean, if some people think the Chinese basket is still available to us, good for them. I have no problem if they believe that the China's basket is there ready, willing and waiting for India. There's no problem. But and I would also like to say that the main reason why I find conversation like this is because of the Russia factor. And frankly, Russia has been shut out of any kind of an agreement with the United States, and mainly because of the or whatever. But over the years, Russia and China have come very close together, and today you have a Sino-Russian alliance in effect. So again, if anybody believes that the value geopolitically, financially, and in diplomatically of India to Russia is more than the value of China, and if anybody believes that that China and India are not competing with each other, or the Chinese are not doing things which are against the interests of India, they are welcome to do so. My calculations are based on real world situations, and they're not based on either, on situations which, are there in textbooks, but which are not there in real life. So I'd only like to say, today it is China that has separated itself. Don't forget, China began this banning of apps. You can't get an Indian app in China, whereas you get WeChat almost all over the world. I think in some parts of India, you can still log on to WeChat. I'm told people have been telling me, oh, you can still get WeChat. The point about WeChat is that American companies, Indian companies, British companies, everybody operating in China has to go through WeChat, and which basically means the Chinese government and whichever entity the Chinese government would like to transfer that information to will be made aware of any communication of a competitive nature by any company. That's why it's important that Prime Minister Modi banned WeChat. And it's very important that despite court cases and other matters, the United States go ahead with its ban on WeChat. So the Chinese are forced to use methods that are not subject to complete control by them. Today, because of WeChat, a Chinese company can be informed by the Chinese government about exactly what is being planned by its foreign competitor. And we have given them that advantage. Look, it's not an accident that China is today 5 times bigger than India in terms of economics. The Chinese work very systematically, and they are working very systematically on what has been described about the humiliation of India, domination of Indo-Pacific. I want to add one final point. If the Chinese face a humiliation on the Himalayan frontier, if they launch a situation and they are rebuffed completely, then I can tell you the impact on the Chinese power structure will be extremely severe. It will almost certainly create tremors in the leadership. And as others here can tell you, if there are tremors in the leadership, they will percolate down the structure. The Chinese Communist Party is not the most, if I may say so, popular party in the world internally. And the only thing keeping it going is fear and the respect that, yes, it's a powerful party that gets its own way. If in a conflict, and with the help of countries or whatever, India can do a 1962 to China, or do a 1971 to China. That's a better way of describing it. That is going to have a very big impact, I can tell you, inside China, and that's going to have a very major geopolitical impact across the world. So I'd only like to say that I would stand by this. Look, there are certain choices that are imaginary, and there are certain choices that are very idealistic. I'm going by realistic choices, and I'm ignoring the imaginary choices.
Thank you, sir.
I would request to be very brief, ask questions very briefly. We want to give more, in fact, opportunity to a number of other students. And also I request the speakers to be very brief. Yes, go ahead. Saran.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure about being brief, but I'll try to do my best. A very good evening to everyone. My name is Sharan. I'm a second year master's student at the department. I have two questions to ask. My question is to Professor Nalapat and Mr. Seshadri Chari. So if we are to evaluate the possibility of a Sino-American conflict in the future, academics like Graham Allison of Harvard University have already compared this in application to the Thucydides trap, right? In the last 500 years of world history, around 12 out of 16 incidents of any tension between a rising power and a superpower have resulted in a conflict. Now, more often than not, there has been a history of superpowers, or for that matter, vice versa, using third parties to create some sort of a asymmetric damage to rising powers, right? So my question is, bearing in mind the ongoing border disputes between India and China, loosely based on what Rahul also asked, how will India's policy of strategic ambiguity unfold in the future? Also, should I tell my second question as well, sir?
Well, I think
no. Only one question right now. We have to give.
Seshadri,
okay, sir.
Seshadri, will you go ahead?
Any other questions are there?
Seshadri? Sorry.
Daksh Sharma has a question.
Go ahead, Daksh Sharma.
Hi, I'm Daksh Sharma. I'm an incoming first year student at the department this year. So my question is to Professor Nalapat mostly. So sir, as China is demonstrating a show of power militaristically at our borders, how soon do you estimate this show of strength by China to move into other spheres like cyberspace or outer space, or as you touched upon, a new economic order via cryptocurrency? Also, how do you evaluate our present capabilities, and what do you think we should do to enhance? As one of the panelists said, we should be more active rather than reactive to China.
Yeah, thank you for these questions. They're very good questions.
Please, I request you, sir.
Hang on. Let me just complete the answers. The first thing is basically about this, this Graham Allison and other things. Well, please don't take that as gospel. In my view, even a short, sharp engagement that results in a complete, if I may say so, a one-sided conclusion will have a tectonic effect. In the case of Russia, for example, 1905, there was a short, sharp engagement with the Japanese Navy that had a tectonic effect on the situation in Russia, and on the Tsarist regime, which took some time, but which finally came. So we're not talking about the kind of war that we saw in the past. We are talking about a very different kind of conflict, and incidentally, a conflict that's already taking place, a conflict that's taking place in the cyber world, a conflict that's taking place in the commercial world, in the currency world, etc., etc. To the Chinese, don't forget, conflict doesn't mean bullets and guns. It need not mean that. It can mean just dominating the enemy. And if you dominate the enemy without bullets and guns, so much the better. So I'd only like to say that a conflict is taking place. It need not be a kind of a world war kind of conflict, but even a short, sharp conflict could have a tectonic effect on the global balance of power by having a very significant impact on the situation in China. I want to end by saying the Chinese believe democracies are weak. Now they look at America, they look at the TV coverage, they look at India, they look at the media coverage. My God, these are very weak countries. They're almost falling apart. They don't realize the strength and resilience of a democracy. And in the same way, we overestimate the strength and resilience of an authoritarian state. So I'd only like to say it can be a very short, sharp conflict. It doesn't take very long, but I would like that conflict to be one in which my side, the Indian side, wins and prevails. And we have to create conditions for that to happen.
Yes, Chariji, you want to speak?
I fully appreciate what Professor Nalapat has said. He has very clearly explained the position as far as conflict is concerned. But specifically, if there is is a possibility of a conflict between US and China. Now the question is, this conflict obviously need not necessarily be a military conflict because US and China don't share borders. So unless there is a shared border, the real conflict becomes direct conflict becomes very difficult as far as the military parameters are concerned. So it is going to be a very different parameters. I mean, of course, nowadays there are technologies like intercontinental ballistic missiles, but then these are all very, it's good as far as you are creating a Star War kind of a situation. But I don't think China China is neither prepared nor is looking for this kind of a military conflict. But as Professor Nalapat very rightly said, China is adept at four kinds of conflicts. Actually, China is always constantly preparing for a war-like situation. Even in peacetime, there is nothing called peacetime China and wartime China. It's always a wartime China. Now, besides the military strength, China is also preparing for three kinds of war. It's a constant preparation of these three kinds of wars. One is the psychological war, another is the legal war, and third is the media war. So China constantly works on these three wars also. You should remember wherever, I mean, for example, there was a maritime congress in Sydney, and where Taiwan was also invited, but Taiwan did not attend. Taiwan could not attend because Taiwan was afraid of the punitive action that China will take. Similarly, there was a conference in Georgia some time back, and in that conference again there was a professor from Taiwan, and his nameplate specifically mentioned his name and the country as Taiwan. China protested so much that till the nameplate was changed to Chinese Taipei, they did not allow the conference to take place. This is the kind of legal warfare that they can go to. We know about South China Sea, we don't have to go far beyond that. As far as psychological war is concerned, they are constantly playing a psychological war. So these are all the tools that they will employ. But as Professor Nalapat very rightly said, it is doubtful whether they will be able to continue this kind of a war with US or without US or wherever it is, if there is a political instability in Beijing.
Secondly, let's say, for example, this D10, the 10 big democracies, if they unitedly recognize Taiwan, what are the Chinese going to do about it? You know, what can they do about it? Nothing. So the reality is a lot of it is bluff. So the question is, we have been afraid to call that bluff because Chinese have been very adept at talking to us in our own little silos. And as far as India is concerned, we have been very happy in our own little silos, if I may say so. The point is, a lot of this is built on perception created by bluff. And as I told you about Taiwan, if 20 countries recognize Taiwan unitedly, including India, United States, Japan, Germany, France, what are the Chinese going to do? Break off from all of them?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions are there? We have some 10 minutes with us. Yeah, will you be very brief? Let me go and I think Vineet is there.
Yes, sir.
Be brief, Vineet.
My question is to Ranade, sir. Sir, you mentioned 2018 onwards, something like this would have possibly been planned somewhere in Chinese circles. So my question is, where do you see as the most vulnerable point? If we're talking of a conflict in a contained theater, which is the likely theater where the Chinese might actually move ahead with aggression? Is it likely to be Galwan? Is it Dipsang? Or is it possibly Arunachal or somewhere else? That's my...
This question is addressed to whom?
To Ranade, sir.
Okay, okay.
Well, thank you. There are a couple of points I'd like to make here because this links up with what Dr. Arvind Kumar also put about the corps commander level talks, about how long will the standoff continue, and you know, if India's headed towards armed conflict. So all these are combined, including your question. And I'll give a short answer. Firstly, the Chinese, as I mentioned, are really not, in my view, concerned about the outcome of a co-commander level talk. They are looking for protracting the situation, and that is what is happening. If it gets protracted, there are two advantages that the Chinese will get. Firstly, they can continue to dig themselves in and get more stuff, more ammunition, more hardware. Secondly, they remain where they are, making it more difficult for us to get them back to the April positions. The second point is about armed conflict. Well, in that, I think the situation can be played. If India is willing to think out of the box and is willing to take action on the ground in different ways, which it has already done in the case of the 10 high points that we have captured. What you see here, it's important to see what really the Chinese want. They have prepared for a short, quick, decisive conflict where they bring in overwhelming firepower and then the conflict results in a victory for them. I don't think the present situation or scenario will give them that. The rapidity with which we built up or counter-built up our response, I think has put them in a bit of a bind. They don't know what to do now. Xi Jinping, to my mind, is delaying because he doesn't know. He's weighing the risks, whether he should launch an assault and then it may land up in a bloody nose for the Chinese. I'm personally certain it will, but in his mind, he would be weighing that option. On the second is, if he withdraws, then what happens? So he is likely to suffer, he will suffer damage to himself and the Chinese Communist Party, whichever option he takes. And I think that is a major issue before him right now. Second point is as far as what is the situation with the United States. Xi Jinping has opened a number of fronts at the same time with the Japanese, with the Americans, with the Taiwanese. And right now, in October, there's a lot of tension in Beijing. They are worried about something which they call the October surprise. That is the rumor circulating in Beijing, in usually informed circles, saying that the Americans may plan something. Their hunches that the Americans may have a showdown with them, incident, as they call it, around the Scarborough Reef or in the South China Sea. If that happens, it will be quite a catastrophic situation for the Chinese. They're quite worried about it, which is why you find continuously articles talking tough, but actually saying, let's have a dialogue and let's make up. Finally, to your question about what is the likely theater, I think in the Ladakh region, my own assessment was they were looking to cut off our access to the DBO and Siachen areas, which means it's secure for them the Artsakh, Gilgit, Baltistan, POK, etc. area where they have a lot of strategic and financial investment. They don't want us to threaten those, and this is what they're doing it. That option, I think, is now closed off, given the strength with which we are present there. So they would be looking for somewhere else, either in the eastern sector or in the central sector, someplace where they can have a quick adventure, or shall I say a quick attack, and show it to be a victory. Given the state of our build-up, I don't think that is possible. So I look, in fact, instead of a offensive right now, to a protracted standoff with an offensive that can happen anytime. Finally, I don't agree that we have a campaign season that ends in November. The last time, let's not forget, in 1962, when conditions were more primitive, the Chinese launched their attack in late October and it ended only in November. This time, I think we should be prepared for anything to happen through the winters. So I don't, say I don't rule out a armed assault. In fact, I think the probability is high, but we have to ultimately wait to see what option Xi Jinping is going to take. At the moment, we are reacting, and I think that is the state of play, at least for some time to come. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anand, can you ask a question? I see your name. Be brief.
Sir, my question is to Ambassador Bambawale. Of late, the Indian foreign policy has been found to be testing some of its traditional limits. And very recently, we had this incident of the SSF forces being involved in the operation, especially regarding the Rezangla peak. So, do you think that India might try to change its policy of silence when it comes to things like Tibet and Hong Kong? And do you think that the time is, or it is, the case is right for doing so? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Anand. And you're absolutely right. I think that the Chinese have indicated, as I said earlier, what kind of relationship they want with India. They want it to be an unbalanced, unstable, tense kind of relationship. And in that kind of relationship, on those terms, India needs to leverage every possible diplomatic space that it can, not only by expanding its relations with Taiwan, but also to the extent possible where the soft underbelly of China is, which is in Tibet and in Xinjiang. What we can do, of course, is rather restricted, but still, I think we should not look upon, and I do not agree with those who say that India has absolutely no leverage where the Tibet issue or the Tibet question is concerned. I believe that we do have a lot of leverage there, and we need to take those steps. I totally agree with what has been said by Professor Nalapat, that non-alignment or strategic autonomy doesn't mean equidistance. It means that you take decisions which are in your own national interest. And if that means getting closer to the Tibetans, getting closer to the Taiwanese, or actually having a kind of understanding with the Americans, so be it. I totally agree with that you cannot be married to a shibboleth. You have to actually see the situation on the ground and work accordingly. And strategic autonomy doesn't mean equidistance. It means protecting your own interest, your country's interest, your national interest. And if that involves an alliance with the United States or with Japan, that is the way we should go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, I think last question is by Dr. Moniz.
Thank you, sir. My question again is to Ambassador Bambawale. Sir, for the interest of those of us here who are trying to make sense of what those two informal summits and the joint statements that came of it, first in Wuhan and later in Mamallapuram. If I am not mistaken, one of the significant references in the joint statement was regarding the strategic guidance from the leadership to the two militaries of the two countries. And the two militaries sort of engage in this kind of a crisis, after the Chinese aggression. So for our benefit, sir, please enlighten us, like how should we read this thing called strategic guidance to the two militaries if it were to lead to a situation? Thank you, sir.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Manish, for that very interesting question. And I think from my answer, you will see that there is a logical train of thought. The current template or the current paradigm in which India-China relations is being structured or is being followed is basically a paradigm which was set as far back as 1988, when the then Prime Minister of India, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, visited China. And that paradigm basically is, or that modus vivendi, as some people have called it, basically is that on the one hand, we will continue to discuss the boundary question between the two countries. At the same time, we will also ensure peace and tranquility on our borders. And on the other hand, the rest of the relationship, particularly in economics, in people to people exchanges, in trade, in commerce, in tourism, in students' exchanges, will move ahead. And that is exactly what has been happening ever since Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, the then Prime Minister of India, visited China in December 1988, right up till 2018. So a period of almost 30 years. Now, it was also very clear as we moved, and people have given you instances of 2013, 14, many other cases to do with international politics. But as we moved away from 1988 and especially after 2014, it became apparent that there were a number of other factors and strains, pulls, and pressures in India China relations which required a basic reset in the relationship. We were looking for a new paradigm. We were looking for a new modus vivendi. We were looking for a new template to conduct India China relations. And that is exactly what was the search when Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping met both at the informal summits in Wuhan as well as in Mamlapuram. But having said that, we were not able to immediately reach a new template or a new modus vivendi or a new paradigm for India-China relations. And we were also very much aware that the situation could easily slip, that China could decide exactly what it has done in the summer of 2020. And of course, preparations for it were made from much earlier. But China could decide that the asymmetry in power between India and China enabled it to make certain decisions unilaterally and force them on India. And that is exactly what has happened. So you can see from this that there's a logic in the relationship as it happened through 2018, the Wuhan Informal Summit, 2019, the Mamlapuram Summit, and what has now transpired in the summer of 2020. But now that the Chinese have indicated clearly how they would like to go about India-China relations, rather than bilaterally constructing a modus vivendi or a template for the conduct of the relationship, they want to show their military coercion, show force, and India will, of course, now have to not merely retaliate militarily, economically, and politically, but we will have to rethink the entire India-China relationship from our point of view. And that is why I said what I said at the start when I made my own submission, that the relationship is set to deteriorate, because for us, if there is no peace on the border, then the relationship just cannot be what it was in the past. And this is exactly the trend, the direction we're moving in. And I hope that the informal summits now fall into some kind of logical, extension from earlier relationships and right up till the present. I'll stop there, Monish. I think you must have all understood what I've been trying to say, and I'm sure that it sounds very logical to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We can take one more question, the last one.
Okay. I just wanted to make a comment, but next.
Please, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
I just wanted to add to what Gautam said. I think he made some very pertinent points. I just want to add a couple of things to that. The first is, Manish, is don't believe everything that you read. When these summits took place, there were at that time turbulence and preparations by the Chinese had already started, as I had mentioned. The second thing is, the man who came for the summit, in fact, the person who wanted the summit, Xi Jinping, is the person who's engineered the entire situation that we are in today. So you can imagine the duplicity with which they have approached the whole thing. Finally, I'd just like to expand on a point that was asked and which Gautam did answer, which is that diplomatic relations or country-to-country relations are based strictly on reciprocity. That is something which intermittently we seem to have lost sight of. But what we do need to emphasize now is, if you want a one China policy, then you have to subscribe to a one India policy. And that brings me to the question about Tibet and Xinjiang, which Gautam raised. We have a lot of levers. Both the provinces are restive. They just need a little bit of encouragement and assistance, which can easily be done. And I think if you look at it, just in terms of land area alone, Xinjiang and Tibet account for half of China. So I just stop there, but leave it to your imagination.
Thank you very much. We can take one question if someone has.
Hello, this is Madhusri. I would like to ask a question to Dr. Bambawale, Gautam Bambawale. Sir, we came to know that there's a chicken snake or Siliguri corridor in India. So we would, and we come to also know about the fact that the Gorkhaland movement is covertly supported by Nepal. And in this Sino-Indian crisis, Nepal is on China's side. So do you think that China is clearing its path to support the Gorkhaland movement in further future?
Thank you very much for that question. I think that the Chinese attempt to do whatever they want, but I think today in 2020, the Indian state is much more cohesive, much more, much more powerful than it was in the past. And I feel that whatever attempts are made will not succeed. Having said that, also let me say that, in your question, you said that Nepal is against India. I don't agree with that entirely. It may look like that on the outside, but I feel that there are some very strong connections between Nepal and India, which cannot be replicated by China. China can throw a lot of money at countries, but it cannot replicate the deep civilizational, social, and interpersonal relationships that exist within South Asia. And that is something which India will also factor in. Temporarily, it might look as if we have a setback in relations with Nepal, but I think in the medium to long term, this will change entirely to India's favor and to Nepal's favor also. So I think that's my reaction to your question. I hope I've been able to answer it, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now the last word by each of the panelists, 1 minute each, starting from Sri Chari ji. Are you able to hear me?
No.
Yes, last word by you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Go ahead. I think he's having some technical problem. Now, Professor Nalapat, last word by you.
Well, all I want to say is that I'm happy to have been part of this program, Arvind. It's good that that the department has held this very important subject, and I'd just like to say that I know that Jayadeva and Gautam are aware of this. That this department has been created essentially to give an India-centric view of geopolitics. And we have, trained a large number of students who have got that particular view and who are doing exceptionally well in having new ideas and new concepts based on that view. I again want to say, Arvind, I'm glad you held this conference. I'm glad to have participated in it. And I think you chose two very, very good experts from outside the campus. That is Gautam and of course Mr. Ranade, and our in-house scholar Seshadri Chari, again, who's an extremely studied individual.
Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, would you like to say last word?
Yes, I'll just end on the subject itself by saying that, there in our entire discussion today over the last hour and a quarter or maybe more, there was an underlying assumption that India is the weaker country and that India cannot call the shots as far as the China relationship is concerned. I would urge all of you to think out of the box. And, India today, we are lucky to have a strong central government, a strong central leadership, which has a complete, it has a complete majority in parliament, and it has the nation behind it. And I believe that, India is already thinking out of the box. And I would urge all of you, students and teachers, to also think out of the box, because I think that will stand the country in good stead, apart from being resolute and determined. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Ranade?
Thank you. Let me make my closing comments. I will also stick to the subject. Basically, what I would like to reiterate is that we are now embarking on a new phase in the relationship. One which starts off with India having stood firm against China, and the game is still not over. I think we are still planning what to do. I doubt very much if this government will be satisfied with having lost even the few kilometers that we have so far. I will also add a couple of other points looking ahead that China is headed, there's no doubt about it in my mind, for difficulties in the weeks and months and years to come. There is a huge anti-China sentiment which has surged around the globe because of COVID. China is in deep economic difficulty. Don't believe what you read in the Chinese press. Let me just toss a few figures to you. Unemployment in 2019, end of 2019, was between 18 to 20 million in China by Chinese figures. And by April this year, it had reached between 70 to 90 million. It had soared because of COVID, because of what has happened. Again, because of COVID, though they're talking about bouncing back economically, don't forget there is an export-oriented economy. And the Americans and the European market are virtually closed because of the impact of COVID. But as and when they open, indications are very clear that neither of these entities, neither America nor the European Union, will allow more than 10 to 20% of their markets to really be accessed by China. I think we must take advantage of that situation, not only upskill our own stuff, but also progressively restrict even more Chinese access to the Indian market, which is the third largest. It's an untapped virgin market. I think that we must do. Finally, let me conclude by just saying that our government has to look at China now as a comprehensive entity. Our government has to adopt an all-government approach, look to China as a hostile adversary, and regulate its policy accordingly, whether it is exporting material for the telecom sector or APIs, etc., for the pharma sector, or any item. You have to be very careful and approach it like this. I think henceforth the game will be played differently. And as far as India is concerned, I think we are strong enough to take on China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And before Dr. Anand gives a formal vote of thanks, I must acknowledge that we have had a very important discussion on a very important theme. And more importantly, we have had a very candid discussion by each of the panelists, sharing their ideas, which was of great learning experience for all of us. So I personally thank them because of their busy schedule. They were able to find time for our department. And it was a great learning experience for all of us. I also thank the participation of our students, research scholars, students from Symbiosis, the School of International Studies, the faculty of the Symbiosis School of International Studies. All of them have participated. And the purpose of this particular interaction really has been achieved by really sharing these ideas and knowing each other's perception, because that is what we can only enhance our learning and knowledge. Now I would like Dr. Anand to propose a formal vote of thanks, and then we will conclude this particular webinar. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to propose the vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the distinguished speakers, Mr. Jayadeva Ranade, Ambassador Gautam Bambawale, Professor Madhavdas Nalapat, and Sri Seshadri Chari for providing enlightened insights into the current state of the bilateral relations between India and China. I would like to especially thank Professor Arvind Kumar, the professor and head of the department, for providing us the opportunity to listen to these four renowned speakers. And thanks especially for moderating the session as well as for providing the guidance needed in organizing this discussion. And as the coordinator, I'm also grateful to all my colleagues for their support in organizing this webinar. And finally, I would like to extend my thanks to all the other members of the audience, including our students, participants from other institutes of Mahe, as well as participants from outside the university, especially Symbiosis, for their active participation. The webinar has certainly proved to be an enriching experience, and thanks to all for making this interaction a great success. And I wish you all a good evening and hoping to see you all in our upcoming virtual discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. See you soon.